to the Guns and Yoga podcast. My name is Wendy Hummel. Today, I have a guest who's a subject matter expert in the topic of retirement, Dr. Medina Baumgart. She's an in-house psychologist at a law enforcement agency, and she is the author of Surviving Retirement, Finding Purpose and Fulfillment Beyond the Badge. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you know that this is a topic that's so close to my heart as a retiree myself. I've done several installments in my masterclass series on retirement and will include them here in the show notes. Dr. Baumgart is an in-house psychologist who focuses on counseling, works with peer support, and builds relationships with sworn and civilian members while embedded in the patrol stations. But it's really her personal experience as a spouse of a retired law enforcement officer that inspired her book and her course. She openly shares her husband's struggle with depression and alcohol after retirement, as well as her own. Despite having the tools as a psychologist, she felt helpless to help her own husband. Dr. Baumgart walks us through a framework in the book that she wants all retirees to know about. She shared a TED Talk link with me, and I'll include that in the show notes. It's from Dr. Riley Moynes, and it basically says that there are 4 phases of a retirement for anyone, not just those in law enforcement, and she briefly covers them in our conversation. The first one is the vacation phase. It lasts about a year after retirement, and we miss our routine. Things start to kind of get boring in that vacation phase, and then we go into what she calls phase 2, where we can feel lost, or what I call the grief phase. She says that this is where a lot of people get stuck, and she references the big 5: routine, identity, relationships, purpose, and power. And because we don't know it's coming, this stage can often be traumatic, and again, where we get stuck and experience fear, anxiety, and depression. So knowing that it's coming is half the battle, as preparation is crucial. She then says phase 3, trial and error, involves stepping outside of your comfort zone, maybe trying something new that you didn't necessarily have a chance to do during your career. And how can I contribute and find meaning? Really experimenting, and if you don't know what those things are, looking for different things that you're passionate about. Now, sometimes Dr. Baumgart says that this phase can come with some disappointment and failure because we try things that maybe we've never done before. But the important thing is to get support and just keep trying. And then if we get to the next phase, that's called reinvent and rewire. That's where you ask yourself the tough questions. How can I squeeze all the juice from my retirement? It almost always involves purpose, meaning, and service to others. Although Dr. Baumgart never set out to write this book, we discuss how she asked her husband to write down everything that he wanted other cops to know about retirement, and the course and the book were born from there. It was really born from their own personal experience. Although it's different for everyone, Dr. Baumgart tells us that the reestablishment of a routine, going to the gym, tackling projects outside of his comfort zone, and some of the ways that her own husband achieved those last steps in the framework that we just mentioned above. Besides her personal experience, she spoke with over 200 retirees as she researched her book, and many of the issues and the challenges were the same. I shared with Dr. Baumgart my own struggle with identity and the shame and embarrassment that I felt surrounding that. According to Psychology Today, our identity is a unique blend of our memories, experiences, relationships, and values that create our sense of self. This mix creates a steady sense of who we are over time, even as new facets are developed and incorporated into one's identity. Although I thought I was pretty diverse, if I'm being completely honest, my role at work was a big part of who I was. I remember hearing one time that you can love your job, but your job can't love you back. It reminds me of something that Dr. Baumgart said in her book, referencing and quoting her husband when he turned in his equipment prior to retiring. I gave you my life and you handed me a receipt. After investing so much work, holidays, overtime, shift work, and trauma exposure, the end can feel so cold and transactional, and I can completely relate to this feeling. The lesson here is that preparation, understanding, and support can lend itself to a very smooth transition, and it doesn't have to be that way. We also discuss the impact our careers have on our physiology. And just because you retire doesn't mean that your nervous system retires. It doesn't necessarily get the memo. And this is something that I talk quite a bit about on this podcast, and I've linked an episode covering a variety of tools in the show notes. If we don't provide an outlet or a way to process or complete the stress response, it's going to come out in ways like arguing, picking fights, anger, and other maladaptive coping mechanisms. Since our nervous system is wired to protect us from harm, we must learn to self regulate, which is something Dr. Baumgart addresses in her book. I really think you're going to find a lot of value in this episode. Enjoy. Welcome to the show, Dr. Medina Baumgart. I'm so happy to have you.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
So today, I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you. We were talking a little bit before we hit record, and you've recently written a book about retirement, and I'm excited to talk about that. But before we do, if you would not mind sharing with the listeners a little bit about your background, what you do, and kind of a little bit about what led you to the type of work that you are now doing with first responders.
Sure. So I am a licensed psychologist in California and a board certified specialist in police and public safety psychology. My degree is in forensic psychology. So I actually initially started on the criminal side of things. It's what I thought I wanted to do. And I worked inside a jail for about 8 years. And it just wasn't really, I wasn't passionate about it like I wanted to be. And timing worked out, and my agency had a position open, and I said, well, I'm married to a cop, so I think I could do this. And I lateraled over to my agency now, where I'm an in-house psychologist, one of many. And now I work primarily with our sworn and civilian law enforcement personnel in our peer support and chaplain programs, doing counseling, consultation for patrol and custody operations, um, and training and anything else that comes up that's needed.
And how long have you been in your current role?
In my current role for 8 years.
Okay, so 8 years working in the correctional facility, and now 8 years with first responders. Okay,
Yeah.
and so if you could just take a moment to share with the listeners a little bit about, you said that you obviously you're a doctor in psychology, but that you have a specialization in police psychology and public safety. I think that's what you said. Could you go into that a little bit and what that entails?
Sure. It is about a 2-year process that's pretty intensive. And you essentially demonstrate to this board of your peers that you are specialized in. For me, it was police and public safety psychology. There's other specializations with the American Board of Professional Psychology, but there's an extensive kind of writing process where you present a sample of the work that you've done. And then there's a 4-hour oral exam where you're talking with the panel to essentially demonstrate your competence in the field.
Wow. So beyond your PhD, this is something in addition to that. So that's a whole lot of school.
Yes, it is. Yeah, there's I think we have just over 100 of us in this specialty nationwide right now.
Great. Well, and then in addition to that, obviously you've got firsthand experience in working directly with first responders for the past 8 years, and of course being married to one.
Yes, yes. And I can definitely say the personal experience being married to one, because they didn't give me a manual on how to navigate that, and so we figured it out, and it's immensely helpful in the job that I have now.
And if you don't mind, I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about what your full-time role entails as an in-house psychologist, because you don't hear about that very often. I know that it's something that does occur, But
Hmm.
for agencies that are looking to do something, whether it be contracting out with a mental health professional or bringing one in, could you just give
Hmm.
us a little bit of the foundation of how it's structured and what you do day in and day out?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So, right now my time's kind of split in half. So, about half of the work I do currently is in one of our clinics, providing counseling. And this is individual counseling, couples counseling, even conducting critical incident debriefings, EMDR. It's about half of the work that I do. And then the other half, I'm embedded in a few of our patrol stations. And my role there is really to build relationships with both sworn and civilian or professional staff, and kind of normalize, I think, the resources that we have, and humanize it too, because I hear I hear all of these horrible stories about our folks who have tried to see a therapist through their insurance, and people have all of these assumptions about that process. So really just interacting with people, one human to another human, and that helps. So in this event where somebody needs something, they're more likely to reach out, and that is in fact what we see. And then the other kind of collateral things that I do are work with our peer support program. I work with another deputy sheriff who's our coordinator, and we provide training for the program. Anything that comes up, we co-respond with our peer supporters and our chaplains for certain critical incidents. And it's really been, I mean, fantastic. I've been here 8 years, but it feels like I've only been here two, because I really, really enjoy what I do.
Yeah, that's amazing because, to what you said about being embedded partially with
Hmm.
some of those stations, it's all about building trust and relationships. And I can see how
Hmm.
you being there regularly, them getting to know you as a person
Hmm.
and trust you, has been extremely beneficial. So that's great.
Yeah.
Besides you, there are others? You said there's a team or a group of therapists that work in house. Is that
Hmm.
correct?
Yes, yeah. So we have, I think we're roughly 20 psychologists right now. And then we have psychologists embedded in other units, and then psychologists that teach primarily full time. But yeah, we're all spread out through our county.
And so I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I'm
Hmm.
curious, do you have a favorite part of your job? Like what is the one thing you just absolutely really enjoy doing? And I'm sure it could be different elements of it, but is there something you like to do the best?
Ooh, I would say building the relationships, whether it's in my office, whether it's out in the field or with my peer supporters. I think just building those relationships, because everyone's got that emotional armor on by the nature of the work that they do. And just being able to, we call it like water cooler therapy, when you're out somewhere and someone says, "Hey, doc, can I talk to you real quick?" But just knowing that, people trust to call you or reach out to you if they need something. I would say that's what I enjoy the most.
I imagine that because you are a spouse of a law
Hmm.
enforcement officer, that it's easy for you because you've even before stepping into the role, you were used to being around law enforcement.
Yes, yes, that definitely makes it easier. My humor and sarcasm are on point. And when I started, I told my husband, I said, I'm not afraid to use them. My husband's a cop card. Yeah, we'll use
Hmm.
and abuse that thing.
And as well you should. And I've said, know, I've definitely think that people who work with our population that are therapists or psychologists,
Hmm.
you're a unique breed in and of yourselves.
Hmm.
Not everyone, I
Yes.
think, is cut out to work with first responders.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. And it's just a different type of work. And it's high impact, very similar, to first responders in terms of trauma and everything, and just really kind of fitting into that culture can be challenging for some.
Now, as a spouse, do you, in
Hmm.
your full time role, ever do anything specifically with family members or spouses?
Yes, with spouses. And we're so fortunate because a group of spouses actually formed kind of an external peer support group for other spouses. And so I get to collaborate with them on some projects, and they'll reach out if they need something. Trying to work with them a little bit more next year. But I really, yeah, we see spouses, we see family members.
That's so great. You know, at our agency, I mentioned that I'm part of a full-time wellness unit, and we're really working to build out our family program this next year as
Mm-hmm,
part of a grant that we have, and just building relationships, not just with spouses, because that was
mm-hmm,
the initial focus, but really just all family members. You
mm-hmm,
know, maybe children, maybe adult children, if that's applicable,
mm-hmm.
even parents of first responders. So it's something that I'm looking forward to building out, and I'm always trying to get input as to what other agencies or other therapists recommend in doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so important too because, as you know, the that support system can make or break things sometimes, and that's not built overnight. And so I think it's so important to interact with family, interact with spouses, to one, give them some just general information, because for me, nobody gave me anything. And then we had to kind of figure it out, and just to help them, but then to also help the officers, because that's really, what they're coming home to. And if that family can be equipped with the support and tools that they need, I think that helps all around.
Yeah, and I can't remember where I heard this, but it may have been another therapist or psychologist that calls family
Hmm.
members the hidden heroes. And I just
Hmm.
love
I
that
like
so
that.
much because I think it captures, we can't forget how important the people that are at home, not necessarily punching the clock, coming to work,
Hmm.
how integral they are in what we do.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. And then, sometimes the job ends very abruptly, or you get injured, or you're off for a period of time. And so, you really want that family unit, whatever it looks like, just to be, stable and supportive.
Yeah, for sure. And so I want to transition a little bit since you talked about that, maybe getting injured or being off for a while,
Hmm.
about what you're doing currently with your book. You've written a book called Surviving Retirement, and just a little
Hmm.
bit about what I know is that that was inspired because of what you went through personally with your husband as he went through retirement.
Yes, 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 yes. The psychologist part of my brain had some worries when he was getting close to retirement, because he was the cop's cop, all in, identity, interests, everything was law enforcement connected. So I knew that he would have some challenges. Um, the wife part of my brain completely underestimated the challenges that he was going to encounter, and then also the challenges I had, because as a spouse, we get used to running our own program, and having our routine, and that very quickly changes. And I think he tried to go back to work within the first few months. But then it just that civilian work life just did not go with him. I think he also went back a little too soon. And so he stopped that. And so he's been retired now 7 years. He just had his 7-year retirement anniversary.
Wow, that's quite a bit of time that's passed. So
Hmm.
it's given you probably a good amount of time for perspective in looking
Yeah.
back because I imagine things are obviously quite different now for you to be able to reflect
Hmm.
back and talk about these things.
Yes. And one of the challenges he had was depression. And, throughout his career, he was pretty emotionally contained. And I think, as he kind of got close, which is very naturally happens, right? When you're getting ready to end something, as you start reflecting and looking back. So we would have these things kind of bubble over, watching a commercial and getting tearful, or, watching a movie and he's like, what is happening to me? So this is okay. This is normal. Um, but, the first few months were great. It felt like he was on vacation. By the time he was ready to retire, he was I won't even say salty, he was crusty and angry. And I think both of us were thinking, just be done already. Just be done. I was worried, he's going to have a heart attack or stroke or something. And, those first few months again felt really easy. And then that started to kind of fizzle away, and he started drinking more and became really depressed. And it was a very unique experience for me because as a psychologist, this is what I do. I have the tools, I have the knowledge to help people with this. But as a wife, because it was so personal, it was almost as if I didn't have any tools. It felt very different for me. And so, we worked through it as best as we could. And when he started kind of pulling out of I call it his funk, um, I handed him a notepad and I said, hey, I want you to write down everything that you would want your partners to know, you'd want other retiring cops to know. And he, you know, wrote down a bunch of stuff. And that's initially what we used to put together this course, the retirement course. And in doing that, people would say, you need to write a book on this, you need to write a book. And I had zero interest in writing a book. And then I actually was on a podcast with Cindy Doyle, Code for Couples. And I'm a huge fan of her book, and she encouraged me to take that leap, and that's what I did.
Well, and I'm really glad that you did because you've touched on so many important things. First of all, I don't think that we talk about retirement enough. I often think that the
Mm-hmm.
retired population is forgotten in the grand scheme of things when we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
mental and emotional health when it comes to first responders and law enforcement. But I want to ask you one thing. I have a lot of things I would like
Sure.
to ask. For your husband, because everybody's process to healing is different, right? There's so many different
Mm-hmm.
paths up the mountain. And
Mm-hmm.
when he did finally, like as you say, get out of his funk, was there anything that he specifically did that you don't mind sharing, tools that he
Mm-hmm.
used to kind of help him get to that point where he was kind of the fog was lifting?
Um, yeah, so he getting back to a routine was extremely important for him. So he goes to the gym pretty much every day during the week, Monday through Friday, and having stuff to do. And so what we ended up doing a few years back actually is kind of we have a dry erase board that's posted up in our pantry. And so anything that comes up, it could be something tiny, bigger projects. Um, he would, do that. So he'd go to his gym, come home, look at, the list and say, okay, I'm going to tackle these, one or two things today. Another thing that was really helpful that he's really started doing more of the last couple of years is stepping outside of his comfort zone a little bit and taking on projects that he would previously never in a million years do. For example, he just built a doghouse. Not in a million years would he ever do something like that, but he did, and it's a chateau. It's beautiful. It's massive, um, but that really helps. And I know that there's still moments where he's um, wants to kind of be a cop and be in that again. But those are kind of few and far between now. So, but yeah, the routine and just kind of stepping out of his comfort zone and trying new things were really helpful.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that because one thing that I think is important for those to know that are listening that are maybe thinking of retiring, close to retiring, or are already retired
Mm-hmm.
is that it's important to find what works for you. There's not
Mm-hmm.
a prescription or a to do or a blueprint, right? It's very
Yeah.
unique because we're all so different. And
Mm-hmm.
so, some people they find that going to therapy or
Mm-hmm.
talking to a coach or being part of maybe finding some purpose and meaning, maybe some kind of volunteer work. There's so many different options that or things, and
Mm-hmm.
all of the above. So once he got to that point where he felt like things were kind
Mm-hmm.
of back on track, so to speak, just finding his new normal, you asked him to just write a list of everything that
Mm-hmm.
that he wants others to know, and then that's how this whole thing got started.
Yeah, and just the stuff that's not talked about. So I went with him to his retirement seminar um, that his agents, the PERS, put together, and um, it they had estate planning and your health benefits and stuff about Medicare and all of that. And I'm over there taking copious notes, and so we left there. I mean, we felt pretty well equipped. I think the mental health component of that was pretty much don't be an alcoholic, you know. And so
Okay, that's not
there was,
that's not
yeah,
real helpful.
exactly. And so yeah, we felt pretty well equipped, and we got out of there, and none of it. So everything he wrote down was the stuff that we were not prepared for. Nobody equipped us. And then as I was kind of researching on my own, one, to understand how can I help my husband, and then two, to really walk through these issues. There's a decent amount of literature on retirement in general, and there is some stuff on retiring from a law enforcement career. A lot of it talks about the challenges, but didn't really have a ton of stuff on, like, okay, well, what do you do about it? Which it boggles my mind, because we know that this job wrecks you. It wrecks your physical health, your emotional health, relationship health, mental health. And then it's almost as if, we say, hey, you spent, for him, it was 29 years. You did this job for 29 years. Congratulations, happy retirement. Like, wait, what? No, his brain and body are not wired for retirement.
Yeah, and I know you know this because you know there's a need, but so much of what
Mm-hmm,
you're saying personally resonates for me,
mm-hmm,
and then just so many of my colleagues and my friends, because as a retiree myself, I often say that I am the poster child for how not to retire, which is what
mm-hmm,
inspires me to share information like this with others, because it's not necessary. I wish I would have known certain things about how to prepare before I,
mm-hmm,
pulled the plug, quite honestly.
mm-hmm,
And so much of what I have found with myself and with others is just knowing that what you're experiencing and feeling, you're not the only one. Because I can tell you, for me,
yes.
and maybe somebody hearing this can help. When I first retired, because it wasn't what I had planned, once I turned a certain age, I left knowing that that
Mm-hmm,
was like the time I could collect my pension. I had
mm-hmm,
initially planned to be there 5 more years.
mm-hmm,
And due to some other circumstances, I decided I needed to go. I I was ashamed because I really was taken back by how closely I tied my job to my identity. And I
mm-hmm.
know that's something that you talk about. And it really threw me for a loop because
Yeah.
as a mother, a wife, I have friends outside of law enforcement, I have interests outside of law enforcement. It really surprised me how much that
Mm-hmm,
impacted me. And I thought I was
mm-hmm,
crazy. And I didn't really say anything for about a year. I just kind of worked through it. And
mm-hmm,
once I started to understand more about what was going on, that's one of the first things I talk to people about when they're
mm-hmm,
thinking about leaving, and just saying, this is something that, happened to me. Just to be aware,
mm-hmm.
because it doesn't happen to everybody. But I
Mm-hmm.
find that those who retire the right way, quote unquote,
Yes.
healthfully, and do things a little bit different, don't experience that. But for me
Mm-hmm,
personally, that was something that really impacted me. And just with any of this, I think just talking about it, knowing that you are not the only one.
so important, because we were, in kind of my effort to understand retirement more and say, hey, okay, are we just this anomaly over here? Or, what's going on? I had talked with, I think, just over like 200 retirees, and some spouses. And I said, okay, well, we're definitely not the only ones. We're not unique here in experiencing this, but it was crazy how many just were not talking about it. And, it's kind of that struggling in silence thing, and it's like, your brain, everything gets wired to think the worst of everything. And so, imagine, like, you no longer have the distraction of work, and now you're home and you're experiencing stuff, and you're like, I don't know what this is. I don't know why this is happening. And then your brain's, racking and trying to figure it out, but it's all the bad stuff, the negative stuff. And that, I mean, toss in alcohol, and other things that could really be a recipe for disaster. And
Yeah, and to your point, one of the things I do in my full-time role is I manage our agency's peer support team. And
hmm
what you're talking about is no different. It's just peer support for retirees and
hmm
families. And we intentionally, and maybe this is because I'm a retiree myself, from the start, we've
hmm
included retirees in our program because of that very same, for that reason.
hmm
And it amazes me still to this day. When you're in it, sometimes you forget that there are still people that don't understand this. That I
Yeah.
have people I know that will retire and they will say one of the biggest things when once they feel like they can say it, I was worried
hmm
that I wasn't going to be important anymore. I
hmm
was worried that I mean, just very openly. I mean, that that's probably the reason, but you don't hear a lot of people
Yeah.
openly admitting that. And
hmm
once they do, I think there's a weight
Yeah.
because they're able to share that and know that they're not the only ones. And so
hmm
I think that's something important for people to know that it can be common.
hmm Yeah, it's exceptionally common. And then it's just, for one of the things when I was researching retirement is I stumbled upon this TED talk with this guy, Dr. Riley Moynes. So he's an educator, but he talked about retirement. And one of the things, which I mentioned in my book too, one of the things that he talks about is kind of this in his research, these four phases of retirement. And so that's something I talk about to set the stage. Like expect to go through these phases. Some go, straight through them, no problem. Some hit roadblocks. But if you know kind of what to expect, it can make things a little bit easier. So he talks about that first, that vacation phase. So for my husband, that was I don't have to deal with this crap anymore. I'm happy. I would say, go out in the back, have your whiskey and a cigar and just enjoy yourself because you deserve it. And once that kind of winds down, now it's like he called it the feeling lost and loss phase. So now this loss of identity, loss of routine, the camaraderie, it's all gone. And you don't really know kind of what you're doing. You're just floating around day by day, but there's no purpose tied to that. And typically with retirees who struggle, they get stuck in this phase. And to kind of work out of that, he calls it the trial and error phase, which is really to kind of step outside of your comfort zone, try new things, which that can be challenging for some retirees because they're used to, the parameters that they operated in for so long. For my husband, he's not really a people person because of the job. So that was like, I don't want to go meet people. People suck. They're terrible.
Yeah,
So
that sounds
it
very
was
familiar.
so it's difficult. And then, that I think anytime we try something new, or step outside our comfort zone, if we don't get what we need from that experience, we can feel very frustrated or disappointed. And it's easy to just throw in the towel and say, screw this, I'm not doing this, and then go back in your, lost and lost space. Instead of knowing, like, hey, no, that's very natural to try these things and don't try it just once, try it a few times. Get that routine in order, and then ultimately kind of regain your purpose in retirement.
I would love if you could provide me maybe after this the link to that TED Talk so we can put it in the show
Yes,
notes.
yes, absolutely.
And of course, we'll still put the link for your book and your course too. But
hmm
one of the things that you said about the phases, which I find really interesting, is the
hmm
second phase. It's something
hmm
that I learned through therapy, quite honestly, after
hmm
retiring, and also from the in-house therapist that I work with. She talks a lot
hmm
about grief and trauma, and I
Yeah.
never viewed grief. I was one of those people that I heard the word grief and I thought, oh, you grieve when somebody dies. Like that was
hmm
it. That was my understanding of it, right? And then once
Yeah.
I really started to understand that I was grieving because of something
Mm-hmm.
that was lost in my role as a detective or a police officer,
Mm-hmm.
and then understanding how grief works and the stages of grief,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, in my role now with running peer support, it's important to know that too. And I think that's that having that information, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that that's what you're experiencing and that it's normal to experience that. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's such a game changer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's kind of, I liken it to like a critical incident debriefing, right? So a lot of that critical incident debriefing is educational. And here's why these things are happening. And here's what you can do to lessen the obstacles to, kind of let your brain and body recover. And the same process in retirement. And I found that, unfortunately, the job it can equip officers with some not so healthy coping tools. And just like, on the job, and why you train so much is because when you're under stress, you revert to what you know, revert to your training, right? And, thinking about retirement, it's if you retire, that's a major adjustment for anybody. And, thinking about how are you going to cope with that stuff? And grief is a perfect example because you are losing that piece of you that you invested so much into.
Yeah, and you've talked about this a little bit, but I want to ask you one of the
Mm-hmm.
things. Of course, this is something that I really like to focus on because I think I mentioned I teach yoga, mindfulness. I
Mm-hmm.
talk a lot about managing your nervous system. That's what I
Yes.
teach a lot about. Can you speak to that? And do you cover that in
Mm-hmm.
your book about the
Mm-hmm.
physiological component of all of this?
Yes. Yes. That's covered a lot in the book. Um, so it's, just understanding that the nature of law enforcement work and the experiences wire your brain and body a certain way. And it's wired in a way that helps you protect yourself. Um, and then, you can pull in traumatic experiences and all of that just kind of reinforce that. But at baseline, I mean, your nervous system is wired to protect. That hypervigilance roller coaster, constantly scanning your environment. And then, in retirement, that that protect piece of your nervous system just waiting, that's really it runs counter to like what the mission is in retirement. And I always explain it like the brain and body, it's like a two lane highway, right? And the body communicates. So most of the communication is body up to brain. Brain then interprets what's going on based on what your body's doing. And so if biologically, if your body is saying, I'm stressed or I'm bracing for something or I can't power down, your brain is going to interpret something's wrong. And that's something like for my husband and I, when he retired, he was kind of cranked on a little bit. And so that would look like dumb little fights about whatever, because he, effectively was burning off the hypervigilance. And there was nowhere for it to go because he's not at work anymore. And so, we ended up getting butting heads a lot the first couple of years because he was just trying to find an outlet for that. And with the nervous system, learning how to regulate, primarily through breathing, which through yoga, that is I always say it's simple but not easy.
Yeah,
And if
you got it because that's exactly right. Getting people to understand how easy it really is and just doing it is a
mhm.
challenge in and of itself.
Yeah, and just understanding, how the nervous system works. Like I always tell people when I introduce breathing, I said, look, the expectation is not you're going to take like, oh, 3 deep breaths and rainbows, unicorns, butterflies. That's not what's happening. Is you have to very skillfully breathe. And it's difficult because, I mean, breathing's an involuntary process. And we typically don't even notice it unless we're having difficulties breathing. And so to be able to harness that in a way that tells your body we're okay right now. It's
Yeah, and I
okay.
think and I think that so many first responders, not just cops
Hmm.
and first responders, but a lot of people really are very out of
Hmm.
touch or very disembodied. And like you said,
Yes.
that that bottom up approach,
Hmm.
I've noticed in teaching this for quite a while now, is that so many people you have to have them experience it to understand it.
Hmm.
They have to feel it because sometimes, I mean, I think it's important to explain why we're doing what we're doing, but I have
Hmm.
seen literally seen it on the faces of people when they breathe, and they
Yes.
even sometimes during our yoga classes, you can tell them what's going on, right? That
Hmm.
practical left brain, like, here's why we're doing what we're doing. But then once they experience it, I've personally
Hmm.
noticed that that's the secret sauce. Now they're like, oh, they almost don't realize how much they need those tools.
Yes. 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 Once they experience it, you can see. I mean, I've even seen, in the office, like session to session, I say, hey, let's practice this here. So I want you to feel it in the room. And then I want you to, you know, in the next week, this is how we're going to practice and kind of come up with a game plan. And just to even see them come in the following week, looking, right? Everything just feels a little bit lighter
Yeah,
and recognizing like you can control that.
yeah, because, and I think it's so wonderful when I hear therapists integrating those types of practices
Hmm.
into their sessions with first responders in particular, because we're so in our head all the time. And I'm
Hmm.
speaking from experience here. And so that's why, teaching these tools are so important to me and I'm passionate
Yeah.
about, because it's helped me so much and I've seen how integral it is just in the whole process of holistic healing.
Hmm. And in terms of like preparation for retirement, and I think just career wise, learning how to, I call it like downshifting, right? So you're in one mode, and then when you go home, you have to be in a different mode. And learning how to help your body ease into that process as opposed to just the extremes, right? I'm up here and then my body crashes, then I'm up here again and then everything crashes. um, Learning that you can have an impact on what that feels like and staying connected to those experiences, because as a first responder, you have to kind of suck it up and lock everything down, right? And
Yep.
it's functional. You have to do that to be able to function in the, in the course of your work. And part of doing that involves disregarding emotions, disregarding uncomfortable physical sensations. And when you do that repeatedly, in a culture that normalizes that process, you start becoming disconnected. And so you really are so used to just locking everything down that your perception changes. It's, I use heart math, heart rate variability training. So, I'll take someone who's genuinely in my office. I'm not stressed. Like, I'm fine. I said, okay, let's try something here. So I hook them up, to heart math, and it's, they're pinging solid red. I said, you may feel like you're fine, but your body is screaming at you. And we implement them breathing in real time. And the technology is really cool because you can actually see the changes. And somebody can go into, that kind of green zone and feel the difference. Um, it's pretty remarkable to see in real time. And if you can learn how to do that throughout your career, that will help you with that piece of it in retirement.
Yeah, and if if you don't mind, because I think our connection got a little bit wonky there for a
Oh,
minute,
yeah.
if you could repeat, I'm
Just tell me.
familiar with heart math, but if you could
Hmm.
kind of go through, just if you don't mind, getting into a little bit of an explanation of what that is, and when you're saying hooking people up to heart math, just so the listeners understand.
Hmm. Yeah. So, math uses the heart rate variability, which is like the milliseconds in between your heartbeats. And it measures that as a way to identify if your nervous system is kind of in this calm, we call like a coherent space, or if it is stressed. And because your nervous system has two modes, it's got the, rest and recover, and it's got that fight or flight, that stress response. And the technology, it's a sensor that goes on your earlobe, that's hooked up to the computer, and it measures your heart rate variability in real time. And so I typically will walk somebody through an exercise without them looking at the screen first, because, everyone's, I know when I first did it, I was trying to understand it. And so it was hard for me to pay attention to the breathing at first. But I'll, walk somebody through, just get a baseline reading. And then, okay, let's try this breathing technique. Okay, now I want you to think about something that's, mildly or moderately frustrating or irritating for you. And then, okay, I want you to breathe again. And I mark on the screen the different parts where I'm asking them to do that. And then when we're done with that session, I flip the monitor around and I say, look, and explain to them, this is the heart math is great because it translates all of the, I call it like the nerdy heart rate variability data into three colors: red, blue, and green. And so as a measure of coherence. And when you see that in real time, look at just thinking about something irritable, look at what happened to your body. Did you feel that? Okay, now look at your breathing. How did that feel? Or if it's difficult to focus on that. And it's so amazing. I got trained in heart math, and I'm like, I don't really know if they're going to be super receptive to this. I got to kind of sell this, but they love it because you get to see it. It kind of demystifies breathing and the nervous system as kind of this ominous thing that everybody talks about. To, oh yeah, look at what I'm doing. Look
Well,
what my body's doing.
and I think too, for those that are not really self-aware, you're not even aware of what's going on. It's proof. Like, cause
Mm-hmm.
I can count, I can't even count. Is what I meant to say. How many times I've had a conversation with people about, oh, I'm not stressed. I'm good. I
Mm-hmm.
manage my stress well, yet they might be on some high blood pressure medicine, and there might be all these
Mm-hmm.
things happening over here that are really indicators that maybe you're not handling it so well. And that's just proof. It's like, well, no,
Mm-hmm.
look at what the machine says. So I think that's such a
Mm-hmm.
valuable tool.
Yeah. And it's amazing to give somebody the ability to not only see the impact of that, but give them that control.
Yeah, for sure. That's something. Yep, you cops and first responders. That's important
Mm-hmm.
to them, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't want you to give all the secrets and content away of your book and your
Mm-hmm.
course, but as we kind of wrap up, do you mind giving everyone a little bit of an overview of what to expect? One of the things
Mm-hmm.
that I think is important to mention, I have the book. I told you I'm holding it up.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read it yet. Is that it isn't that big, which I think is important.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like it's a really easy read, and
Yeah.
which is important because sometimes people don't want to sit and sift through a long book.
Mm-hmm.
So, so if you could kind of give us a little bit of an overview of what to expect with your
Sure.
book and your course.
Sure. Yeah. And it's very much just the meat and potatoes. It's not fuzzy or fluffy. And that was important to me. And what we did is we broke down retirement and some of those areas that specifically impact retiring law enforcement officers. And each chapter covers different areas. The beginning, we talk about those 4 phases of retirement that I mentioned, and some other aspects of retirement. And then we kind of go into deep dive each chapter into a specific focus, like identity, biology, kind of helping things downshift, relationships, mental health. Each story. So for me, it's important. And I actually learned to really appreciate this through peer support, but it's sharing your story. And so each chapter starts with a story. My husband obviously approved everything that went in there, but this is what my husband experienced, or this is what I experienced. And then we break down, this is why these things happen. And then here's some tools. In the beginning, I call it taking inventory. So check in. What is going on? And then if you notice that this might be a vulnerable spot for you, then here's some things that you can do about it. Because in my own, as I mentioned, like my own search to understand this, I found a lot of, hey, yeah, this is going to be really difficult. Cool. Thank you. Like I needed tools. And so
What
it's
are
so
the
important to
solutions? How can
articulate.
I be supported through this? Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So it really just breaks it down that way. Very, very much just real talk. It kind of gets down to the nitty gritty of everything. And that the course is the same way, but really, this is all of the stuff that we wish we would have known going into retirement.
And
That would have
hearing you
helped.
say that sounds exactly like what I said and my husband says, because we're both
Hmm.
retired law
Hmm.
enforcement. And so that probably brings a whole separate other complicated layer to the retirement when you've got
Hmm.
two of the same kind
Yeah.
in the household, because we both experience things differently as
Hmm.
we retired. But yeah, exactly. And that's what I think is important as we wrap up for listeners to hear, is that this
Hmm.
is something that I don't really even care if you just started the job. I think this is something that people need to think about from the very beginning of their career,
Hmm.
because you don't know how long your career is going to last. I made
Hmm.
it 21 years, planned on 5 more, but there are people that get injured, get fired. There's
Hmm.
different things. And so
Yeah.
having this understanding early on, I really don't know that it's something that you can do too soon.
I completely agree. I mean, in an ideal world, I would say, hey, once you get on the job and you go through your training, like within that first year, start preparing for that exact reason. You just never know when, you're going to leave the job. And all of the tools that are in that book are things you can be doing throughout your career to boost your resilience, to prepare you for this big adjustment that's going to happen.
Exactly. Well, Dr. Baumgart, I am so appreciative of your time and the work that you're doing with
Thank
first
you.
responders. It is so needed. And tell your husband thank you for his involvement in this, because I know
I
sometimes it's
will.
not easy for people to talk about things that they've experienced personally, but
Hmm.
it's so beneficial, because the work you're doing, you're not really going to ever know, I don't think, how impactful it's been on someone.
Thank you so much. It's great talking to you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you found value, I ask that you take the time to do a review. Share the episode with someone who you think may be interested, maybe a retiree or someone soon to be retired or a family member. Thank you as always for listening, and remember, we are better together.